Moving now to another disturbing conflict. Afghanistan nearly completely under the Taliban's control as the Islamic extremist group conquers the capital of Kabul. And all this following the United States' unilateral military withdrawal, which President Biden insisted would not allow a Taliban takeover. But beyond the obvious consequences already rippling out across the region, many are primarily concerned that the Taliban's victory in Afghanistan will actually give a boost to terrorism globally. And Israeli analyst Ben-Dror Yemini is saying that this is just one example of how the spread of Islamic extremism is actually all the West's fault. With me now to explain is Ben-Dror Yemini, Israeli journalist and author of Industry of Lies. Ben-Dror, thank you so much for being with us. Now, let's start with your basic assertion in the op-ed that you recently wrote. How can you blame the West for the spread of an anti-Western religious extremist ideology?
Just look at what happened just 3 months ago in May in the conflict that we had with the Hamas. I mean, it took something like between 5 to 10 hours until the demonstration began. And the demonstration of against who? Against Israel, not against the Hamas. Hamas is calling for the extermination of Israel. Hamas is a kind of a jihad chapter, one of many others, just like the Taliban, and they are demonstrating in favor of an anti-Semitic organization which is ruling the Gaza Strip and not against the Hamas. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, what are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, did we see any demonstration in favor of the Taliban? No, we did not see. So how comes that so many people are demonstrating against who? Against Israel. Against Israel, who is maybe the only one country on earth that is still fighting the jihad. And you could see even Jews demonstrating against Israel. And you're wondering, what are you doing? I mean, Hamas is calling publicly to kill all the Jews. It's a racist entity. So what are you doing? And yes, they are doing it. Because between Israel and the Hamas, between Israel and the global jihad, they never, but never, demonstrate against this kind of jihad, this chapter of jihad, but they are demonstrating against and again. And they have this kind of BDS and boycotting Israel again and again. What are you doing? Do you have any idea what you are doing? I mean, it's not that the Hamas is looking for freedom, liberation. I mean, they have whatever they wanted. The only one condition that Israel put in order to lift the siege was, I mean, enough with the rockets. Let's make peace. We don't want you to suffer. We don't want anybody to suffer. They insist to refuse to any proposals, any plan that came from the international community. They insist on what? On just only one thing: rockets, industry of death.
So I want to get back to your original assertion again, though, because as a follow-up, in your op-ed, you write that Israel has for decades attempted to impress upon the world the extent of damage and destruction that organizations such as Hezbollah, the Taliban, and Hamas have caused, but that facts are an inconvenience to progressive thinkers. And all over the Western world, protesters are directing their ire at Israel. Why do you think that is? And do you think that these recent events, especially, say, for example, in Afghanistan, might change the Western outlook?
I hope, but I'm not optimistic. I mean, considering what I read from so many scholars in the United States, in the West, I'm not that optimistic. I wish that all of what is going on right now on the ground in Afghanistan will enable to some people, not maybe to the scholars that are totally anti-Israelis, but to so many other people, in order to understand the nature of the conflict. It's not a conflict about liberation. It's not a conflict about freedom. It's not a conflict between, as they like to put it, between the oppressed and the oppressor. Not at all. Who is oppressing? It's the Hamas who is oppressing its own people. It's not Israel that is oppressing them. It's not Israel that is not giving them the option for good life. It's wherever the jihad, Hamas, Taliban, Hezbollah, wherever the jihad is taking over, we see destruction and hunger and the failed entities, countries. I mean, look at Lebanon. What is happening because of Hezbollah?
So I wanted
look
to
at
actually.
Yemen.
So I wanted to bring actually Lebanon and Hezbollah up actually as an example, because you referred to the recent rocket attacks that came into northern Israel from Lebanon, and how villagers in southern Lebanon actually came maybe a little too late, but to prevent Hezbollah from launching from the middle of their town and using them ostensibly as human shields. Do you think that the solution for this is not going to come from the West ever? Is the solution against Islamic extremism in the hands of forces on the ground in every situation, or is there a situation again where you think the West might actually come back?
No, I don't think the conditions in Lebanon or South Lebanon are the conditions in
just as an example
in,
about
the Gaza Strip. Yeah, but generally speaking, I cannot tell you that I can trust the West. I cannot tell you. I mean, mainly under the circumstances that we are facing now in Afghanistan, in the airport. I mean, it's so sad to see that so many people who helped the United States, I mean, they are probably going to be abandoned, completely neglected. And we have no idea what is going to happen to them. But generally speaking, I think Muslims in many countries, they are the people who are suffering from the jihad. Hezbollah, Hamas, and other jihad organizations. I mean, they should fight. They should do something, just like the people from Hatzbaya, this village in South Lebanon, who really stopped the Hezbollah people and told them, enough, because we are going to be the victims. What are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, we don't need this kind of war. They have, by the way, no conflict. We have no conflict with Lebanon, not about border, not about anything else. And yet the Hezbollah is attacking. What now will people, the scholars of the West, what are they going to say? Occupation? There is not any occupation in South Lebanon. And yet, we saw Noam Chomsky, for just one example, but he's not the only one, who is going to meet the head of the Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. And so on and on and on. I mean, it's a kind of, sorry to say, but it's a kind of a Western disease, this kind of identifying yourself with the oppressors. It happened so many years ago. We know exactly what happened in the 30s. And unfortunately, it might happen again.
All right. Ben-Dror Yemini, scary predictions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.